Oh, hello there, and welcome back to the Phil Talking D20. So, today's video is not an attack video or a debunking video about Talking 20's latest video, because we're not about negative content, and I don't want to attack him because it's Christmas time, so happy Christmas, Cody. And I want to start by saying I'm really sorry to hear that you had a lot of hassle on Reddit where people clearly attacked your players, by the sounds of it, very heavily, which is not cool. You know, I did a video where I talked about my campaign, and again, wanted to make it clear that I wanted to keep that separate from my channel because it's private, and it's very important that we respect how people want to play a game, because I've always said it's about our game at our table. And that's really important. You know, people can sit down with their friends and run any game that they want, any way they want, be that absolutely core in the system based on all the book's rules, or with some homebrew, or with some kind of personal kind of spin or flavour on things. But there's always a but. There are a few points that I want to address in that video. Mainly the importance of the illusion of choice being a bit of a lie. A lot of people are keen to focus in on this notion, preconceived and not necessarily true, that you only ever do one thing. So, anyone ever played a rogue in 5e, or a paladin in D&D 5e, or in 3.5, or in Pathfinder 1? Oh, he's talking about Pathfinder and D&D, perhaps slight impartiality. Sneak attack for the rogue? How many times do rogues use one of their only, not the only, but one of their major DPM damage output devices, the rogue and their sneak attack? It's a critical component of their class. It goes up as they level up, and it is intrinsic to their ability to put out big, nasty, horrible, flanking, kind of sneaking, stealthing, stab damage that bumps their damage up by multiple d6. The illusion of choice? Do rogues playing D&D feel that they are subject to the illusion of choice because one of their major and strongest actions when they play combat in 5e is sneak attack? No, they're perfectly happy with the rogue, and good luck to them. I really like the 5e rogue. I think it's great. It's a lot better than the rogue in 3.5, which still wasn't bad, but it's a really good, addressing to that particular kind of playstyle. And it is the playstyle of the glass cannon, big booming damage outputter who can't take a lot of punishment back because they're not a primary combatant. That's not the illusion of choice. That's how the game designers designed the rogue. And the paladin, the illusion of choice. You've never smoted evil. You've never looked at your not only, but one of your major DPM output vents of burning a spell slot to do extra smite evil bonus d8 damage in combat. The illusion of choice? Yeah. So both Pathfinder and D&D, regardless of what number you put at the end of them, have, especially when you only use a core book without using any of the great content that developers like Paizo and Wizards add as they grow and increase the content for their game to sell more books because they're businesses. They add stuff, but if you're talking about the core classes, rogue, sneak attack, paladin, smite evil. Now, I'm not being obtuse. I've read the 5e PHB. I've got it open in front of me because it amused me that this kind of Wizards of the Coast sales pitch about the linear zero choice, free illusion of choice, or you will be tricked into choosing the optimal choice so that you only pick one feat, is not true at all. And if I'm honest with you, when you actually look at something that Cody very clearly stated in his second video, when you remove character creation, that's where you find the illusion of choice. Now, let's be brutally honest with you, just by looking at the 5e Rogue and the 5e Paladin as two very classical, solid examples of the illusion of choice debunked, because Smite Evil's a thing, and it's pretty much one of their only things, bar when you start looking at oaths and the couple of options, and it is only a couple of options. And that's not criticism, because if you look at the champion in Pathfinder 2e, it's surprisingly similar to the 5e Paladin, and that's for good reason. They are both D&D based games. 5e is based on early D&D concepts evolved over time. Pathfinder 1 was a direct revision of 3.5. I mean, basically, Pathfinder 1, when Paizo came steamrolling into the market and really mullered Wizards of the Coast on the sales front, Pathfinder 1 was a direct, I suppose, really, attack on the direction that D&D 4th edition had taken, that a huge amount of the D&D community did not like. 4th edition was not a popular edition. Lots of people like it. Lots of people still like it. That's perfectly fine. Lots of people like Starfinder. Lots of people like Five Torches Deep. Lots of people like Cthulhu. They are allowed to like those games. And YouTube channels in general shouldn't be telling you what you should like and why you shouldn't like something else. That's not our job. So I don't want to linger on that topic, but I also want to talk about something that I thought he didn't get it wrong. All right, Cody didn't make mistakes. Cody didn't fail as a GM or fail as a player, but he has only played the game for about a year. And again, slightly touchy subject, would you say to a chess champion, "Oh, I've played chess for a year. I'm sure I know everything there is to know about chess"? Would you say to a 40k tournament champion, "Oh, I played 40k Warhammer 40,000 for a year. I know everything there is to know about the complicated meta of Warhammer 40,000"? I certainly wouldn't ever challenge Cody on 5e, full meta concept of all the intricacies that must exist within 5e. Because I don't have, well, I probably have ironically, about a year's experience of 5e. I've read the books. Guess what? Again, a little bit of dispelling of illusions here. The core book for Pathfinder 2e and Pathfinder 1 is one book. It's a big book, and it has everything in it. Everything. You don't need to buy a player's handbook and a dungeon master's guide. The core book, when you buy it, has everything you need for the games master and the players. You just buy one book, and then you can use online SRDs like the Archives of Nethys to get your monsters, or you can buy the monsters manual, because you do really need a monsters manual in your life. Who doesn't want to look at cool artwork and be inspired for running their sessions? You can then also buy the vastly growing pool of adventure paths, or the games mastery guides and the advanced players guides and all the other books that Wizards, much like their most recent release, of that witch lady, which is an interesting topic because that book is bringing some quite strong changes to 5e. They are optional. You do not have to use them, but it is showing you that Wizards of the Coast are looking at ways to refresh and change the way that they look at 5e, probably because they're thinking about a 6th edition. That's a different topic of conversation. 5e is going to end. It has to. It's been around a very long time, and although it's still a great system that's doing very well, it can't exist as it is forever. That's why it's called 5th edition. It's the 5th edition of Dungeons and Dragons. Pathfinder 2 came about because the developers wanted to change the system. Now, let's address another important kind of point, and that is Pathfinder is really crunchy and really rules heavy. It's not true. Categorically not true. Does it have different rules? Yes. For example, initiative. When you read the initiative section, it's like a short paragraph, it tells you that if a player character and a monster draw on their initiative roll, now initiative now is based in Pathfinder 2e on your perception check. That's what they've decided to use as the core mechanic of initiative. It's no longer a separate initiative bonus, which is what traditional Dungeons and Dragons has used for a very long time. It's now based on your perception because they're talking about how aware you are as a marker for how fast you act in combat. Brilliant logical move there, I think we can all agree. But it also says you can use other skills. For example, if you had been moving stealthily and triggered an encounter whilst you were actively stealthing, you would be allowed to use the stealth roll you'd made. Now, if you were actively stealthing because perhaps you were playing a Pathfinder 2e rogue, shock horror, the Pathfinder 2e rogue is also very similarly structured to the 5th edition and previous D&D editions of the rogue. There really isn't a huge amount of difference. That's me being impartial, not me telling you that the Pathfinder 2 rogue is completely mechanically and rules superior in every single way, because it is of Pathfinder 2 origin and not the inferior 5e version, which is a laughable, chumpish, impish attempt at a rogue. That's not true at all. The Pathfinder 2e rogue is very good. It's very solid. It has some great mechanics. It has some really cool flavoured options. And if I'm brutally honest with you, they took a steer on the Pathfinder 2 way of how they approached rogue from 5e. Why would they do that? Well, it's very simple. Paizo and Wizards are both providers of Dungeons and Dragons games, and they're all based on Tolkien. That's not specifically true, but in terms of most of our modern connotations of Western role-playing games, elves and men and dwarves, Tolkien's a little bit older than Dungeons and Dragons. Games Workshop, this was fascinating. Games Workshop in the 70s sold Dungeons and Dragons in the UK. They got the license to sell Dungeons and Dragons in the UK. And they based Warhammer, not on D&D, but on Tolkien. Elves and dwarves and men and orcs and goblins. So, telling people that Pathfinder 2 is worse than 5e isn't true. It's different. It's perfectly good. 5e is perfectly good. Are they different from each other? Yeah, there are areas where they are further apart, and there are areas where they're much closer together. But they're very, very similar. So the illusion of truth, the illusion of choice applies to some extent to both. Now, when I watched Cody's combat breakdown, and he spent a huge amount of time throwing lots of numbers at you about Pathfinder 2, and then didn't spend anywhere near as long talking about 5e, I wasn't and can't be the only person who noticed there was a very, very similar chain of actions being used by the 5e Ranger. Very similar. Almost 3 actions similar. The difference being in Pathfinder 2, I don't have to know if it's a move action or if it's a standard action. I don't have to know if it's a bonus action or a swift action or a free action. All I need to know is it an action or a reaction or a free action? Now, that's not the 3 action system, but that is the core components that they use to structure a combat encounter. Now, he heavily talked and focused on the big increase in DPM that you could do if you'd chosen lots of special abilities to make you an archer, because the concept he talked about was, oh, I'm going to play an archer, so I'll play a ranger because I want to be like good with a bow. Yeah, really, really simple, very simple character concept, worryingly simple, probably chosen for a reason, simply to try and really demonstrate one fairly weak point. But what he didn't talk about was magic items. If you wanted to be a ranger who was good with a bow, do you need to spend any feats on using a bow? Or do you simply bide your time using a bow, using normal attacks? Because I played 5e and huge amounts of 3.5, huge. Like I've got like a 27th level character in 3.5, so that's a lot of game time. I roll to attack. That's it, isn't it? Like, who doesn't do that in a combat? It's not like that's not being obtuse. That's a thing. You roll to attack. And in Pathfinder 2, much like in 5e with the power attack for the fighter, you ever played with a fighter who's taken power attack who doesn't say, I'm going to power attack? The illusion of choice? But be that as it may, this is a really, really important concept to grasp with Pathfinder 2. Cohesion of a party and how Pathfinder 2 really empowers you to work together. So he gave lots of different examples about how the ranger could approach the fight against those 2 wights. And he kind of went on, this is kind of the kind of the non-optimal, slightly silly, but cool and fun one, which was to make a move action, make a trip action, and then make a grapple action. And he was like, but that's really kind of risky and silly because the other wight could close in, but it could be cool and exciting at the table. So we're going to rerun that and explain why actually that is a really solid idea when you're kind of looking at it from a perspective of how can I, get the most out of Pathfinder 2. So the classic Pathfinder 2e Ranger is a dwarf, which is why in that thing you can see that there was the human fighter locked in combat with a wight, and then that kind of big ginger-bearded dwarf. Normally, actually, in the artwork with a crossbow, because that's kind of their focus with the ranger in their kind of, we all have these, D&D has them as well, the kind of the archetype heroes, the named heroes that exemplify each class so that you can kind of go, cool, all right, now I know what I'm talking about. I've got this kind of poster boy or girl for each class. So, actually, from a perspective of taking advantage of that beat by 10, very simple mechanic, beat by 10, of optimizing combat and why combat in Pathfinder 2e is cool, he could stand where he is, just like Cody said, and run the strongest option with a 72.975 overall percentile point of advanced combat DPM output Metatroning. And, bam, 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 boom, big shot into the wight, boom, turnover. The fighter, he's a fighter. He's got loads of hit points, much like the ranger, because both of them are primary combatants. He's not a secondary combatant, the ranger. He can get stuck in with blade or bow, regardless of how you build them. He's got a good solid hit point pool. He's built as a primary support combatant as opposed to a primary output DPM combatant. But, you know, that's another talking point. He's done his job. He's been a good player. He's smashed a load of damage out to help the party overcome the encounter. But what if the fighter is ropey because he's taken some big hits and he's not at full chat hit point wise? So that's a different talking point. And in that situation, maybe the party are concerned that he might get dropped. Now, normally we talk about, 4 people parties or 3 people parties or whatever the average is, but obviously he used 2 because it was simpler, perfectly sensible thing to do. Otherwise, you'd be there for ages talking about the millions of options that in 5e or D&D, a crazy party of players could just literally throw at you as a GM, make you kind of go, oh, make me 7 different checks to do that crazy idea. It might work. See what happens. Because who hasn't had that as a GM? But this is why it's kind of cool in terms of cooperation, and something that I think Cody may have missed when he's kind of looked at that scenario. The ranger makes a move. He moves, and this is what the player actually says. He says, all right, my dwarf is going to run up to the wight that is looming over my injured colleague, and I'm going to stamp on his knee and break his leg and cause him to collapse to the ground. And the DM goes, cool, that's 2 actions, move and an athletics check. Brilliant, cool, cheers. I've used my move action, bam, there's my athletics check. Now, he's a dwarf, and let's be fair, Cody says he's using a bow. But in character creation, our dwarf character player said, I'm going to focus on strength, and I'm going to use a composite short bow, because if I use a long bow, I'll be at -2 in close combat, and also may provoke against certain foes, some of which are the most numerous foes in all of Golarion, namely Orcs. Orcs get attack of opportunity. Want to deal with loads of Orcs, because there's loads of them, and they roam the lands, causing trouble, and are a classic hallmark of a lot of kind of campaign theses. Like I said, Lord of the Rings, who are the main villains in Lord of the Rings? They're orcs and goblins. And orcs get attack of opportunity. So they're pretty tasty when it comes to thinking you can do what you like in combat. It's not true. So they come screaming in. Unfortunately for the wight, he is a undead. He doesn't have a lot going on upstairs. He's not a fully trained, hardened combat mercenary with years and years of extreme combat experience and training to teach him the art of attack of opportunity, because, let's be clear, attack of opportunity and assuming that everything should have attack of opportunity bogs down combat. One of the main focuses for Pathfinder 2, limiting the availability of the attack of opportunity, was very simple. It was to make movement and the choices of movement more available to players, because 5e, if you want to make multiple attacks, you have to do what? A full attack action. Can you then make move actions? No, you're stationary. You're always stationary. If you want to do the maximum DPM in 5e and use all the extra attack class features that you've just unlocked because you've got to level 5 or level 7 or level 12 or whatever levels that you're getting your extra attacks at, you won't be able to move. In fact, what will actually happen is if you move, you'll only get 1 attack. In Pathfinder 2, if you move, you could make 2 attacks. Or you could move and make a power attack, which is 2 actions because you're doing loads of damage. So, just an aside. The dwarf goes, I charge up to the wight and stamp on his leg to bring him down. And the DM goes, brilliant, move action, 1 of your actions gone. Bam, make me an athletics check. That's an action gone, it's an attack. Okay, cool, douche, bam. Oh, I've rolled 28. Amazing. You beat it by 10. That's a critical. Oh, it's a critical on my athletics check. Yes, it is. You smash his leg and it crumples to a horrifying kind of ruin and shatters inwards. And the white wails as it flails its arm and collapses prone to the ground in front of the fighter. The fighter goes, oh, it's prone? Yes, it is. Now it has penalties to its armor class. What does that mean for the fighter? It increases his chances of critting it further. You are optimizing your fighter. That's not bad. That's not poor roleplay. That is an ally charging to the aid of their compatriot because they know that they're in trouble. Perfectly acceptable. Perfectly cool. Very cool, in fact. The white collapses to the ground. Now, what if the fighter doesn't get to go before the white, and the white decides to use one of its 3 actions to get up? Brilliant. It provokes an attack opportunity from the fighter. Smash, probably hits it, happy days. If it doesn't get up, it has 3 actions. If it does get up, it has 2 attacks, not 3. Again, we are optimizing our encounter for the benefit of the whole party. Meanwhile, our ranger still had an action left because he ran up and he leg stomped the white and caused it to collapse to the floor. And he says, right, it's prone. So I can either, because I'm a dwarf and I have lots of hit points, tank, because I'm a dwarf with lots of hit points, so I can tank as a ranger. I can just smash the one on the ground with my composite shortbow, utilizing my high strength and the athletic skill that I chose to have when I was creating my character, because I get to choose lots of skills, not be arbitrarily given skills from a little list and perhaps not get the ones that I want or need to reflect the character that I'm trying to create. You can in Pathfinder 2, by the way. Again, I'm not saying that that makes Pathfinder 2 better. I'm saying that Pathfinder 2 gives you more choices. Full stop. So, he can either go, I'm going to risk the other white running up behind me and getting off 2 attacks, but I've got a half-decent armor class, and I know I've got a lot of hit points and I'm in good shape because I've spent the last few combats in this dungeon hanging back, optimizing myself with my bow damage, because that's what I'm built for, and that's how I'm playing my character. Or I can take a shot at the other white and soften him up so that when he gets into combat, we can start dealing with him, and I'm going to hope and rely on my fighter to really put the hurt on this now much easier to hit, much easier to crit, and also action reduced white that is in combat with my fighter who's in a bad way. Easy. Beat by 10. Fail by more than 10. This notion about the complexity of Pathfinder 2e is an illusion. It is not real. The reason why it feels clunky is because you're not familiar with the rules. You have to game with a system for a long time and read the rules before you really get to grasping the full kind of fluidity of it. There is a phrase, it's like 10,000 hours of your time to master something. That's how long it takes to really kind of get good and flowing kind of reliable kind of, knowledge and kind of skills base that you can just kind of rely on. About 10,000 hours doing something. There's only about 9,000 hours in a year if you don't sleep, eat, drink, go to the toilet, do anything other than. So it takes time. And that's my point earlier on about I wouldn't challenge Cody on his really solid, really fast, really reliable, experience-based, immersed-based time within 5e. He's run loads of it. He can go, I already know what that rule is because I've read it half a dozen times. I've started reading Crucible 7's Wrath and Glory D6 based system roleplay game. It is radically different and in many places familiar and relatable to other role-playing games. But I've very, very little idea of how I can run it, how I can use it, and how I can teach my players how to use it, because it's going to take me time reading the rules. Now, why does Pathfinder 2 keep giving us all these examples of how rules work? What if you've never played a role-playing game before? What if you've never played any role-playing game before? I have friends that have never ever played. They have no idea how a role-playing game session works or functions in any way. They have no concepts or preconceptions about what happens at a gaming table and what players can and can't and should and shouldn't, and how they play and what they do. And they've no concept or idea about what on earth a GM, whatever the hell that means, because they don't even know what that means, has to do to run a game. It's a completely alien concept. So when Pathfinder 2e takes the time to explain everything, it's because they're not talking to experienced players. They're talking to people that have never, ever played a game before. Because they have to. Because it's about bringing people into the hobby. It's about including people into the hobby. It's not an elite club where just because you've gamed before and you've got friends that game and that you've played lots of different games and so you know how to game. It's not about that. Those bits of rules aren't there for experienced players, because I'll tell you, this is as simple and gritty and crunchy as Pathfinder 2e gets. Most of the time, you're rolling a d20. Most of the time, you're adding a number to that d20 that'll be on your character sheet, a skill check, an attack roll, just as it's always been. Except now, if you get 10 or higher, then the target number, you crit. And what does a crit mean? Something cool happens. What if you fail the check? Generally, as a rule of thumb, it's not gone quite as well as you'd hoped. What if you really fail, and you fail by 10 or more? Something's gone really bad. Natural 1, natural 20. Beat by 10, fail by 10. Do they sound familiar? I think they probably do. Now, for the purpose of bias, there are plenty of bits. For example, in Pathfinder 2e, look at Dispel and how, let's be brutally honest with you, clunky, because it is a bit clunky, the dispelling and the countering rules are in Pathfinder 2nd edition. They are clunky. Once you have read it several times and understood what they're trying to kind of get across to you, bearing in mind they have written it from the perspective of explaining it to people that have never ever gamed before, because we have to move at the speed of our slowest mover so that people can be brought in to enjoy the hobby. Then you can go, oh, I get that now, it's really simple. To flip that on its head, I have heard from very, very experienced 5e players, some of whom are genuinely 100% published 5e authors who have written actual adventure paths for Dungeons and Dragons that has been published by Wizard of the Coast, heavily criticise how awful encounter building and calculating is in 5e. Does that now mean that because the rogue and the paladin have limited options in combat based on sneak attack and smite evil, and also that the encounter building and planning rules are infamously awkward and clunky and arbitrary in their decisions and their vagaries, does it mean it's now a illusion of choice game system that's rubbish and should not be played by anybody and never be touched ever again? No, because people like it and people do a good job of working with it and people enjoy tweaking it. That's perfectly fine. My channel has some really great videos that I recommend you watch about how you can change up combat in Pathfinder 2e to go really crazy with tripping and disarming and kind of weapon special properties to kind of amp stuff up. Because again, for the sake of impartiality, when they talk about having to have a free hand to trip someone, I get that. It's a bit of a balance thing. And they're also kind of wanting to stop two-handed weapon fighting juggernauts with a +1 striking magic greatsword that does 2d12 plus their strength modifier. Terrifying, I think we can all agree. I mean, imagine that dwarf ranger who'd taken animal companion but still wanted to be good with a bow, simply buying a +1 striking composite short bow and having a 2d6 plus 4 damage output bow. Yep. Does he need the class feats to make him a cool archer now? No, because he's a beast. 2d6 plus his strength modifier, composite short bow of striking death. Yeah, it does need the feats, does he? He can have an armed companion and be a cool archer. And also have a great axe that's a +1 striking great axe that does 2d12 plus 4. So he can mix it up in combat because he's a ranger that gets good hit points and a dwarf that gets good hit points. And boom, Bob's your uncle, Fanny's your aunt. Now, as I said, is 5e a perfect system? Nope. Is Pathfinder 2e a perfect system? Nope. Do I throw myself to the lions proclaiming that 5e is totally rubbish and should not be played and generally is completely inferior? No, it's perfectly fine. It's a very good system, as is 5e. So hopefully that settles some of the, shall we say, common Wizards of the Coast claims that 5e is somehow rules light and super easy and accessible and not at all crunchy, versus the Pathfinder 2, which is completely linear and completely full of the illusion of choice and super crunchy and impossible for mortals to understand. Yeah, it does, because it's not true. It's a Wizards of the Coast salesman's lie. That's not saying that Cody is shilling on behalf of Wizards of the Coast, because he could have reached his own conclusions for his own reasons. But Paizo is Wizards of the Coast's biggest competitor, and as any business, it is in their best interests to push back against their biggest competitor with preconceived salesman pitch notions of crunchiness. That's not true. Just read the rules, get familiar with it, learn to play the system, and in time you will become fluent with the not particularly complicated, fairly straightforward rules. Does it give you the illusion of choice? No. In fact, it gives you a lot more choice. If I'm honest with you, maybe a bit too much choice compared to 5e. If you don't want loads of choice and stuff that you have to kind of record keep and keep track of, that's a consideration. Does that make it better or worse? No, just means it's different. Anyway, hopefully this festively, although it's rainy and a bit miserable here, it doesn't feel very Christmassy at all, video is enjoyed and liked. Like I said, Cody's opinion is perfectly valid. It's not wrong. It's just an opinion. And so in the, obviously, interests of discourse and conversation, much like Cody said, he wanted conversation, I say, Happy Christmas, one and all. Enjoy gaming, whatever you game in. Go play some Five Torches Deep, or some Starfinder, or some Cthulhu, or some 5e, or maybe, after this video, try your hand at some Pathfinder 2e. Cheers. Peace out.